back to Optimism Vaccine. I'm Steve, and joining us this week, just so I don't forget about him, ciao, Jack Easton. Little Italian for you there.
Yeah, that's right, because you're heading off to Italy to
I am.
do whatever they do over there, eat calzone and cannoli, possibly inside of each other. You could do that.
Yeah.
Cannelloni, calzone.
You could totally do that.
Easy.
That seems like more of an American.
I mean, when I think of Italians, I just assume they're like people who live in New Jersey. You know, there's no
the greatest food hack absolutely is putting one perfectly good food inside of another, and I think a lot of Italian cuisine really is open to that concept. Ravioli, you could have ravioli inception. Theoretically, there's nothing to stop you from doing it. There's no laws. You can just do whatever you like.
I was thinking about just getting like a whole ass log of mortadella and just kind of carrying it around and nibbling it on it for like 8 days, but we'll see how it goes.
What was it? Was Sopranos
Steve can't
thing?
Eat ravioli though.
Oh,
that's
yeah,
the problem.
that's
no ravioli for Steve.
That's a shame.
Listen,
No, Steve, you got to do the Sopranos thing and go around going "Commendatore" or whatever to everyone in Italy, and they just look at you, give you side eye, and like fucking American.
Yeah, I promise I'm going into this like strongest American flex possible, which is I have learned zero Italian. Duolingo sends me a notification every day reminding me that my trip is coming up, and I haven't been keeping up because I did exactly one lesson. So what I'm probably going to do is same thing that got me through France a few years ago. I'm going to learn a couple of key phrases and then kind of mix those in with English and then accidentally speak Spanish a lot, which is, I don't know what that says about me when it's like, oh no, someone's speaking a language that I'm not that familiar with. I guess I will default to Spanish for some reason.
It's ingenious. It works. They're all Romance languages. They probably, it'll work.
Yeah.
Now, it's not going to work if you go somewhere, like if you go to like, Czech Republic or something, Spanish might not have the traction there, but you're keeping...
I feel like you go to those countries, you're like, well, we're going to rely on this guidebook or something.
Yeah, a lot of pointing.
You're not going to learn one of those languages.
No.
You're not going to learn a Cyrillic language or something. It's like, oh, Christ.
It'll be fine. It'll be all right. I'm not worried about it.
We can make it a tier in the Patreon. Oh yeah, welcome, Myros. Yeah, we can make it a tier in the Patreon.
Yeah,
it's like if you give us $100 a month, Steve has to learn Czech.
I mean, is that something people are interested in?
We can find out. We can float this.
It'll be great. And then we'll watch a bunch of Czech New Wave movies and I'll be like, well, actually, these subtitles are a little bit off. People love when you do that shit. It'll be great.
Yeah, especially because it adds so much to the discourse because it's like, well, yeah, I mean, they're probably contextualized, maybe altered slightly for our culture, but yeah, it's best to look at it from your rigid point of view as someone who learned to speak the language 3 months ago.
I will say I do like when I'm watching a movie and I have downloaded something from like open subtitles, and they never do this on official releases, but you get this on open subtitles all the time where they tell you what they're saying, and then in parentheses below, there's like a brief explainer so you can have some context for what the fuck that is.
That really subtitling is, that's my favorite kind of subtitling too, and that I very much associate with fan subs for anime. They will, because they're all like totally into Japanese culture, so all their subtitles are like showing off that rather than actually translating the text and localizing as necessary. So it's always like, yeah, the literal translation of which not even a Japanese person would translate it as that. So it means you're an idiot. It doesn't mean this specific word, But yeah, they do it all, and then it's like, and then the subtitles are like 8 lines of text at the bottom of the episode at all times. It's completely incoherent gibberish. Fantastic experience.
I feel like 90% of anime subtitles are just like pained grunt.
It depends on the anime you're watching, obviously, but
all I need to know,
I don't know.
I just need to know, the proper interpretation of when the moisture bead forms on an anime boy's face, like on the side of his head. What does that mean? I don't fucking know. Sure does happen a lot. Wow. Yeah. Anyways, I'm excited. I get to fuck off for 2 weeks, so we get the return of Jake after this episode. I'm sure a lot of people are excited about that. You don't have to listen to my voice anymore. I got a new phone too, specifically for the trip, because I kind of smashed mine into oblivion, which is good because
What?
you know,
What happened
four
here?
years ago, 4 years ago when I bought the phone, I bought a case for it, and I'm a sucker for a good advertisement, and it was like an Instagram advertisement, and this guy, he was like a Chilean dictator. He was up in a fucking helicopter, and he just whipped his phone with this case on it, just out of the fucking helicopter, and the phone was fine. That's what I need because I'm a definite phone dropper. And 4 years later, I have finally reached the point of more than a helicopter's worth of drops, and it was not in great shape. So I'm back, baby. I got a fucking.
That's
telephone.
fair. I'm curious about this Chilean dictator who's advertising phone cases on Instagram. But sure, I don't go on Instagram.
The Chilean dictator does it. I'm referencing I believe it's a Chilean dictator who would like take dissidents up into a helicopter.
Oh, okay, you're referring to Pinochet, yes.
Pinochet, yes.
Yeah, yes, indeed. Wonderful guy. Yeah, and his helicopter rides. Yeah, okay. Sorry. I'm catching up here. I see what you mean. You're just invoking decades of trauma, the American South too, or the South America, not the American South, I guess. It gets too complicated. The USA shouldn't be allowed to just refer to itself as America. It should have to go as something else. You can't have an American continent, then an American country, and then a South America and a South America or American South. We need to work this out. This is like,
well, Jack, I just want to thank you for me taking a kind of a throwaway joke and just kind of skating over it.
I think we can make this entire thing the episode. No, we can bring this in. This should be a whole thing because I mean, I think what we're discussing today is pretty similar. Probably close enough.
Go on, do tell.
Go on. I mean, he doesn't have a helicopter in this, obviously, but there's quite a lot of bloodshed in these movies that we're about to discuss, and a lot of punching, a lot of hurting, presumably a lot of bereaved families. I think the connections speak for themselves.
They really do. So we are back on our Kitano bullshit, and we're dipping into the golden era here of the 1990s, and in the grand tradition of us not doing any of this in a logical order or even logical groupings for the most part, we're kind of straddling this line between the pre and post accident Kitano and some of the Yakuza or Yakuza adjacent films that he was making during that time period. So I am excited though because we get to talk about Sonatine, which for my money is far and away his best film. And this is one that I don't know. I somehow have gone my entire adult life without watching this, which is weird because there was a period of my life where if Quentin Tarantino was coked up and talking about how much he liked something, I would probably, get it from Netflix, DVD by mail. And, this led me to things like watching Larry Bishop's Hell Ride, which is trash. But I somehow never saw Sonatine, and I don't know how I managed that.
Yeah, you could have picked this up from Rolling Thunder Video, Tarantino's own label. I think that's how it got pretty good innings in the US, although I believe that was cut for some reason. All the Kitano releases in the US got cut for like violence, which makes absolutely no sense to me. And they were uncut in Europe, but they, so it goes. It's a very weird thing, but I remember researching this back when I was getting into Kitano and I was picking up his stuff, which is all this period, it was all available in the West. It was very weird that like from Sonatine onwards and even Violet Cop prior, I think they were all available easily. You could just pick them up, even though Kitano was not like, I mean, he was doing really well, I guess, international festival wise. So it was kind of, he was a hot property, but he seemed like kind of a little bit off the beaten track. So it was very handy. Everything was available, but then it was all getting cut for like R ratings, I guess, in the US. But it's like, who was showing up to these movies anyway? And Tarantino of all people, the man who would do run-ins with the MPAA anyway. But yeah, I think Sonatine it's the Kitano film to some degree in terms of like, it gives us the iconic image of him shooting himself in the head, which is kind of strange that that's the iconic image of Kitano internationally as, acclaimed comedian in Japan, Takeshi Kitano, and pretty much it's almost like a reaction meme online, just footage of him with a gun to his temple and blood spraying out the other side. But yeah, I think this is really where the title itself even is as I said, it was kind of like a reference. Like a sonatine is like a gradation for a composer. It's kind of like before you compose an entire sonata, you would compose a sonatine, which is a shorter, simpler piece. And Kitano himself felt that he had achieved that with this film. So he was taken very seriously for him being an artist. So I think it's kind of a nice plateau start. Although I would argue, and we'll probably tackle this in another episode, I do think A Scene at the Sea, the film he made just prior to this, is a masterpiece too. And honest argue, I think maybe even a better film overall. So I don't know, but Kitano kind of hit, I think this was where he realized this is very close to what he could do, and I think it had great legs in the West because it was also Yakuza oriented, which sells very, very well. And it still, but he could do that, but he didn't have to trade off his own very, very dark sense of humor and very, very kind of grim vision of human nature and society. It all kind of comes together here, and definitely I think if you have any interest in Kitano, Sonatine is a perfect place to start.
Yeah, which is why it's in episode 3 of our overview.
Yeah, that's why we did that. It was.
It really is the perfect place to start.
No, and to start with Takeshi's, where we started. Obviously, everyone loves Takeshi's, and then work backwards to the 90s when he was like the most beloved art house video crossover guy you could imagine. Like, it's kind of strange. I mean, he was winning major awards and getting, playing in art house films and stuff. But I mean, all his stuff was, you could kind of pick it up even at regular video stores. It was sort of strange metric he'd managed to hit, which is perfect. Art house movies, but violent. Perfect.
It's odd the space that his filmography kind of occupies, especially when Sonatine came out and directly after that too, because in Japan, we've talked about this before, like he's this huge cultural figure. He's just ubiquitous for his comedy. And his movies didn't do well in Japan.
No.
But then you kind of get this European and then later American art house crowd that embraces him, but only to a certain degree. And this is part of the, I don't know, like, I guess just the landscape of the film industry at the time. But, he's winning awards at Venice Film Festival, things like that. But it's not crossing over in America to the point where it's like, ooh, he's, winning Oscars and doing this, that, and the other thing. He never kind of reaches that point that some foreign filmmakers more recently are kind of getting that recognition. And then also because there's these distinct European art house influences and Kitano being Kitano, there's a lot of brief, extremely violent moments, but they're just that. They're moments. They're not extended scenes. And I feel like at the time, there were other filmmakers that maybe got a little bit more traction just from an independent standpoint, because of the growing movement of like extreme Asian cinema, that Dimension was buying up everything they possibly could. So if you made a movie that was like adjacent to Audition in any way, shape, or form, or Ichi the Killer, then they were going to push it out there. And this definitely doesn't fall into that. So again, it's like this bizarre kind of in between space, but it's also what makes his filmmaking so special. And there's really nothing like a Kitano film from this era, and specifically Sonatine is just fucking amazing. And part of that is because you do get the Yakuza story and the violence, but a lot of this is just like 90 minutes of nihilistic fatalism, but also just like hanging out with your buds on the beach. It's a really odd contrast.
Like, well, you've heard of like Yakuza Graveyard and so on. This is like Yakuza Vacation. It's kind of like they get away. It's the beachside romp for the Yakuza. And it is a funny precept, and I think Kitano, like, I think Sonatine does a really good job of like grounding this kind of strange humor that filters through. And I'm thinking like specifically like early in the film, So I mean, the storyline of Sonatine basically involves there's a turf war brewing down in Okinawa, and the one of the families in the mainland has kind of been brought in to they want to go down there to kind of like just give a show of force, just kind of hang out there. And Takeshi Kitano's character is leading up that group that's being sent down there. He doesn't want to go down there. He has some suspicions. Maybe there's more to it than that. But, you know, it's supposed to be like, just go down there, just hang out, it'll be fine. And so that element is introduced. The head of the Yakuza says, you know, head down to Okinawa, there shouldn't be any bloodshed. And then the very next scene is the Yakuza, like, just grabbing a mahjong parlor owner, just, like, manhandling him into a car, and they then murder him because he basically refused to pay protection money, to kind of, like, cut this idea of, like, there's always bloodshed. And then by the time they get down to like they go down to Okinawa and they're all just in holiday shirts and they all get picked up on a little mini bus, and it's just this mini bus full of gangsters being driven around, and it's just this utterly surreal backdrop. But the violence underpinning it and the nerviness underpinning it is presented very seriously and concretely, and then the rest of it is just this sort of strange kind of wistful, kind of like a losing track of time. I mean, they're because most of it is just a waiting game. It's kind of they're trying to see what's going to happen next. So it's kind of this unusual, kind of traditional, kind of like it's spinning the Yakuza film kind of on its head a little bit, and it's very unusual in that sense, and it has a lot, I think, of that, like that fatalism of like a Melville film, you know, of that kind of like lonely men just, you know, kind of like hanging out and that camaraderie, but there's this emptiness underneath it. And it's an interesting kind of a setup.
Yeah, and it really does kind of take what you traditionally would conceive of as, you know, what makes a Yakuza film, going back to, you know, the Battles Without Honor and Humanity series. I think that's a great, like, hey, you want to know what Yakuza movies are all about? Watch that. But here, and this is the thing that I really love the most about Sonatine is, you know, in all of those movies, the Battles Without Honor and Humanity series, and a lot of the Yakuza movies from the 1970s on into the 80s, they have all these, you know, it's these twisting, turning plots and all these tough guys, and you know, it's all these men who are just kind of like jockeying for power and positioning. And this is the same type of thing that Kitano's playing with in the Outrage trilogy that we covered in the last episode. But here, it's the exact opposite of that, because everyone feels like they're just powerless and sort of drifting around. And even Kitano's own character, who's like a stone cold fucking killer. I mean, God, how do they get to Okinawa? Well, he has to meet with the boss, and the boss is like, you're going here. And he's like, I'm not fucking going there. And then it's like, cut to them in Okinawa landing and getting on a bus. It's like, okay. And there's all these things that just, you know, play out, and they have no control, and they're just kind of like moving from moment to moment. And there's no clear idea of what their objective there even is. We know that there's some beef between one family and another, but we're not privy to any of that. And Kitano and his guys are just sort of isolated from everything, but still, you know, basically collateral damage throughout this entire movie. So there's a shootout where some guys get fucking blasted in a bar. They get taken from the bus, which includes ice cream. I think that's a nice little touch.
Yes, he brings ice cream for all of the gangsters.
Yeah, all the gangsters have their ice cream, and then they go to this little like office or whatever, and it's just a big piece of shit. And they're like, yeah, you'll be fine, just hang out here, then our boss will take you to dinner, then we'll figure stuff out, no big deal, super chill. And then immediately, like a gunshot rings through the window, and then 10 minutes later, a bomb goes off and kills 2 people inside this building. So they're just like, okay, we're fucked. They're just like, well, I guess we're going to the beach. Well, what are you going to do at the beach? I don't know. We're going to wait and lay low and just figure things out. And then they're just drifting, and they're stuck. And then, you know, Kitano's character, he starts to open up a little bit because, of course, Takeshi Kitano, he's got to play this stoic gangster. That's his whole thing. And at one point, a woman asked him, like, oh, wow, like you kill people all the time and blah, blah, blah. And she's, oh, is it you? Because he killed a man in front of her. Is that the first time you killed someone? He's like, no, I killed my dad because He wouldn't let me fuck chicks or something. And so he's going through all this, and it sounds like all this tough guy shit. And she's like, oh, you must not be afraid of everything. He's like, no, actually, I'm like terrified of everything all the time. But when you're constantly afraid, it's easy to hide it because it's like the only emotion that you feel. And that's pretty much it. Like, that's the essence of it, right?
Yeah, it's interesting watching this again, kind of within the context of particularly where he would go later on. Like, Sonatine, and again, within the context of, like, Kitano is this enormously successful guy, and he's lived kind of his whole life publicly in Japan since the 70s. He's been ubiquitous everywhere on TV, books, makes his movies, acting, writing in newspapers and so on. So like his business is everywhere in Japan. Like, he's a massive public figure, and it's so unusual to watch Sonatine because, I mean, it reads very clearly as like this is a film. It feels like a film about depression, a film about someone who's just not kind of dealing, like, not doing too well, but like sublimating it into a very, you know, beautiful kind of an artistic construct. But I mean, it's very much a film about like, why shouldn't I kill myself? And you know, and honestly, a film about not finding a great answer for that either. You know, it's a film about, yes, a man in danger and kind of like this Yakuza to and fro that he's caught in the middle of. But really, it's kind of, yeah, it's a film about how kind of like masculinity is a construct, and a kind of a goofy one at that. And it's kind of thinly pulled over top. Like, they play these little childhood games on the beach to kill time and do this and that. They have their bad jokes, but there's this kind of like just kind of chasm next to it. You know, I mean, there's still things that at one point where Kitano's character plays Russian roulette with everyone, but he's actually taken the bullet out. There's no bullet in the gun, but no one else knows that, and he's just pointing a gun at people and pulling a trigger and smiling. And since he's in charge, they all have to just kind of like smile and nod, but you know, like the dynamics, but like no one knows, and that's a funny joke. And then he has his dream where he does kill himself. Like it's just this kind of there's a remarkable kind of a darkness cast over this, again, sunny beachside romp. Effectively, the summer is so a kind of a recurring thing throughout Kitano's films. So many, like even A Scene at the Sea, I think it's full Japanese title translates as like, that summer the sea was so quiet or something like that, or so still. You know, it's a summer movie. Sonatine is a summer movie. Hana-bi, kind of like, there's certain elements in that on the beach as well. Kikujiro is set in the summer. You know, he's much more associated with like kind of like that season specifically. A lot of his films are set during the height of like a sweltering hot summer. I think Boiling Point as well, actually his second movie is as well. And you know, it's like just sun and nice and chill, but there's just an unhappiness underneath so much of it that's really striking, and comes out in these kind of very dark jokes that like you say, like the Russian roulette, which are, you know, kind of funny in and of themselves, or like a bus full of gangsters, these kind of visual rhymes and visual jokes. But there's like, it's a really interesting dynamic. And then of course we have the music of Joe Hisaishi, who was his longtime collaborator up to, I think, Dolls in like 2002, and then sadly they had some kind of a falling out that I'm not 100% sure what it is, but they've never worked together since. So like his later films we've talked about, from Takeshi's through the Outrage trilogy, don't have a Hisaishi theme, and I think for me his core 90s work is so defined by Hisaishi's themes. And again, it's this kind of like wistful, lilting kind of a theme, over top of, again, this kind of pretty gnarly kind of existential dread piece. A very, very peculiar kind of an effect, and very specifically Kitano. And like, no one else, I think, was making films like this at the time. I can't really think of anyone doing it at all. I mean, there's riffs on it certainly, and you could look and see what maybe he was drawing from and inspired by, but like no one else is like this. This is just a really unique kind of a balance of ingredients. You know, that a lot of people, I think a lot of people looked at like the gun fights and stuff that were not very like action forward, and maybe thought like, oh, that's very Japanese. Like, it's very, you know, like Yojimbo, Sanjuro, like the final fight of that, where it's like literally one sword swipe, that's it. you know, like like this very almost like minimal action choreography that Kitano kind of takes it one further, and that his action scenarios almost don't have any movement or even coherence to them. They're like entirely geometrically composed, kind of like ideas of a gunfight. They're not really an actual gunfight. And this thing is kind of funny. I think Kitano, maybe for me and other people who kind of came up at that time, kind of thought like, oh, that's so Japanese. And now I look at like Japanese action movies made around it and in the 80s, and no, they're much more on board with like the Hong Kong like insane stunt work, martial arts, karate chopping shit. Like this is really just Kitano was doing this, and it's this very specific kind of a tone, you know, of like high violence, but like kind of like it's extremely violent, but we cut through a lot of it, and then like big gunfights, but they're not action set pieces. They're more like weird kind of conversations, almost like caught, you know, shot reverse shot. It's a really striking thing, and I think it all comes together in Sonatine, which I think is one of the reasons why this film has become such a kind of a focal point for the 90s cinema, and for particularly I think for people who were interested in non-Hollywood cinema at the time. This really kind of pulled a lot of eyes over and going like, oh, you can do all of this. This is very different. I mean, there's really a completely different kind of analog to Hollywood film. Like you would have been looked at real weird if you came out with this, particularly if you were already a noted celebrity otherwise.
Yeah. And if you look at, I mentioned Takashi Miike earlier, and how I feel like he had more traction in the West, or at least with Western audiences. It's a great contrast too. If you look at the kind of work he was doing, a lot of DTV Yakuza action films at the time. And if you look at like, oh, Bodyguard Kibo or Shinjuku Triad Society or any of those, it's like none of that shit looks like this or has the same tone, or no, it is. Yeah. It's just like completely off in a different realm. So the idea that kind of somber, still ultra violence is just associated with Japanese cinemas is ridiculous. Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. And I think here also Kitano finds his it's A Scene at the Sea, which I mentioned earlier. I think it's a remarkable film. I think it's where he found a lot of his visual grammar, but it's weirdly an entirely violence-free movie. It doesn't have Yakuza. It's about a deaf mute garbage man learning to surf, and it's a wonderful, lovely film. But you know, it didn't sell well in the West. That was one of the ones that was harder to find in the West, because you couldn't put a man holding a gun on the front cover, you know, which is what everyone was looking for. I think he found, you know, but there's so much of that grammar then comes into Sonatine, his film grammar. There's this really interesting things he does. Like we mentioned, the mahjong parlor owner who refuses to pay protection money, so they end up stringing him up to a crane and dunking him in the river until he drowns, in a particularly cruel kind of a set piece. But the end of that scene after he's been drowned is it's a single shot of the crane with the body hanging from it, and it's not, you know, it doesn't feel like, it's not in the rhythm of the scene as it's transpired, where, you know, they've said take care of, you know, like Kitano's character is leaving and he's like, get rid of the body or whatever. This is like everyone else is left, but the body is still hanging there, and it's kind of like this it's just this kind of composition shot. It's like this flavor of like dwelling on the I guess consequences of this fatalist, vicious kind of thing they've just done, but in this really painterly frame that is just kind of edited in. And of course, it's worth mentioning Kitano does his own editing and has done his own editing, I think, since Boiling Point. I think he's always pretty much helmed up his own films. You know, and he's finding his rhythm here. Later on in the film, there's an assassin who shows up to kill Kitano's whole crew, and he's introduced in this really unusual shot where he's facing the camera, almost like it's like school picture day. And he's introduced the camera, and we don't know he's an assassin at the time. He's like dressed just like he's some old guy dressed for fishing, and he's just facing the camera, and then he just kind of like, after he's introduced, he turns and starts walking. It's this like very theatrical kind of an introduction, like he was staring at the camera and then he starts walking into the scene, like the, you know, Kitano cut in before he actually said action or something. It's a really unusual effect. And then, you know, like these little flourishes Kitano is finding, where he's finding these kind of like rhythms and images that don't necessarily fit into a traditional storytelling mode, but he wants them in there. They add something else, another dimension, and they really do. And I think much of what's really great about Kitano's work through this period are those little additions, those images that he finds and that he understands kind of are great inserts in between to move between what otherwise would be, you know, like he's still quite story focused. His films still have a strong narrative bent, particularly through this era. You know, you're not going to be confused about what's happening at any time, but he's able to just kind of like introduce those elements to kind of show that he's kind of like exploring and thinking about this visually. He has this really interesting visual grammar that one of the things, I mean, we'll talk about it later as we get to Hana-bi, but like, I mean, Kitano for me was, you know, he was my introduction to taking Japanese cinema, like delving deep into Japanese cinema. And it was interesting because once I discovered, I know it's kind of a facile comparison to some degree, but like once you get to Ozu and you're like, why, you know, I'm now a person who watches 1930s Japanese movies, you know, which is it's a place some of us find ourselves, and it makes it difficult to have conversations with other people who are like, you what? But like you watch Ozu, and Ozu has those, you know, famous those pillow shots and things, and it's like it's really easy to take those in when you're already familiar with Kitano. There's a similar function there, this kind of like breathing between scenes, this non-story function insert, and it's really nice when it's done. And it's kind of one of those things you just kind of wish more people would experiment with, honestly, because you really, there's all kinds of flavors you could do with this. Like Kitanos are not the same as Ozus, but there's a similar kind of an effect to it, and it's just kind of like not particularly explored by many other filmmakers who, you know, and I feel like at this point it's getting further and further away from it, as more and more people become slaves to scripts and necessity and efficiency, and basically just making television, it feels like. So, well, you know, but whatever.
I think, you know, Kitano's visual language and the way that Sonatine is constructed and his character in the film, you mentioned this earlier, but he really nails the what's depression like angle, because this really is, it feels like it's a movie about depression basically, and it's not like, oh no, I'm so sad and I'm going to tell you about all the things that make me sad. It's like, no, it's just kind of this dull numbness. And there's part of the movie where a guy, he walks onto the beach and he blasts one of Kitano's boys directly in the head and kills him, while Kitano's like kind of sitting behind a boat, just hanging out. And prior to that, they were goofing around and trying to like skeet shoot a frisbee, and then they were like playing baseball with the frisbee and having a good old time. Kitano's eating sunflower seeds. It's more beach fun. A lot of beach fun in this movie. And then this guy gets blasted in the head. But then the scene after that, it like cuts super hard to the rest of the group, basically like, you know, talking like, this is fucked. Like, what are we doing? And Kitano is still on the beach, and he has the frisbee. And he's just throwing the frisbee to himself, because I mean, that's just it. It's not this like, you know, extreme highs and extreme lows. It really is just this dull numbness. So what's he gonna do? There's nothing for him to do. So he might as well fuck around with a frisbee on the beach, because it doesn't matter.
I'm thinking I might be back. Am I back?
Oh, you're back.
We got an Adam Myros in the house.
I see you guys waited for me to start the discussion. I'm glad you know, we just held off. Very, very considerate.
So Adam, what are all of your thoughts on Sonatine starting now?
Well, you guys are just discussing a scene that kind of highlights something I found very interesting with the film, is, and I suppose it runs through his work as a whole, is that there's a certain detachment of logic from a lot of the scenes, and that comes down to editing. It's just very dissociative. Even that scene you're talking about, where all of a sudden this sort of assassin comes through, and it seems like it's building toward this crescendo of violence, and it kind of doesn't. The guy just shoots one of them, and then immediately kind of we go away from that. And it seems like illogical. There's a certain illogic to all of the sort of punchy events in this film in particular that really lend it a particular dreamy sort of vibe, and that's what this movie is to me. This movie is the ultimate vibe. I could just sit down and watch this for ages. It's everything you want from just a good vibes afternoon.
Mm-hmm. Ultimate vibe of like, should I kill myself? Maybe there's nothing.
Well, I mean, it's a downer, but it's a very like Gen X down. Like it just feels it's 90s vibes all over this thing. I don't know. It's just got such a particular feel to it that I find enrapturing. Like I think this movie's goddamn spectacular.
Yeah, and it's also, we mentioned some of the comedy, but there really are absolutely hilarious moments. Like I was fucking dying when Kitano, he's bored, he's on the beach. They're finding all these different ways to fuck around. They're like dancing like geishas, and then they're doing fake sumo wrestling on the beach. And at one point it's nighttime, and you think there's like a serious discussion about to happen or something. And Kitano calls the other guys down to the beach. And when in fact there is not a serious discussion, he simply dug a hole in the beach and covered it up so that the other guys would fall into the hole, which is very funny. And then he's got his top lieutenant guy with him, and they're walking back. And then this is the big punchline is he actually dug a second hole specifically for this scenario. So his top lieutenant falls in the second hole, and it's just it's great. It's hilarious. And
I mean, the ultimate punchline is there's a third hole revealed later.
Rule of threes.
Just as like a throwback joke.
It's great, but again, like how many movies can you say are able to walk this line between this crushing, just depressed fatalism, this nihilistic outlook, a movie about a guy who's really just going back and forth about whether or not he should blow his fucking brains out in any given moment. And it's funny, and it's got just these amazing explosive moments of violence, and it's got a little bit of everything, and it's one of a kind.
I think the role of the comedian, because I think this is something that will be picked up as well in Kid's Return, particularly because Kitano obviously is best known in its native Japan as a comedian, as part of these manzai duos who do these kind of nonsense conversations, which they even have a little bit early on in this movie. I forget the character's name, played by Susumu Terajima, the guy who's in a bunch of these Kitano movies, and it's just always so much fun to me. He's just like this. He's like just this small, wiry, angry dude in every one of these movies who seems exasperated by how annoying everyone else is to him. And he's hanging out in Sonatine. He's one of Kitano's men, and he's hanging out with a younger local gangster who has been to the mainland, or been to Tokyo, I guess, a couple of times, that he just keeps asking Terajima's character if he knows this shop or this person in Tokyo, like this vast metropolis. And eventually the guy is like, no, I don't know any of these people, and they all sound terrible. Like, do you know any respectable people in Tokyo? Like, and it's like this almost man's-eye comedy routine being played in the middle of this film. But I think it kind of reveals that Kitano himself seems to see the comedy or a comedian's role as someone who's somewhat outside of the flow of Japanese society. And so his comedic interjections, I mean, the comedy of the film also shakes the kind of hierarchy of the Yakuza group themselves, to the point where they kind of forget themselves at times. Kitano's character can make jokes. He razzes Renosugi, the other actor who's playing his top lieutenant. He keeps razzing him about his stupid shirts, and there's nothing Osugi's character can do about it because Kitano was the boss. But then Terajima's character does it later on as well, and he gets reprimanded because he's actually like lower down the pecking chain. He's not allowed to make fun of Osugi, but Kitano is. But there's kind of like this the use of joking around and comedy and stuff is kind of like it mixes up the relations between all these men, which is generally otherwise defined by their ranking within the Yakuza Brotherhood. And I think this, as I say, we'll go through to like Kid's Return, is very much this kind of idea that comedy is kind of like a third way almost. It's some kind of another way to kind of like push through, and maybe part of like this whole era that he's in is like Kitano kind of saying that like comedy really helps him. It's real important, because otherwise all he sees is him with a gun pointed at him. Like, that seems to be part of what's going on here.
Sure. Absolutely.
Well, Myros, I know this was your favorite of the bunch, so I'm glad your computer crashed because now you don't get to talk about it. But
Yeah. I hopefully we're out of the woods on this. I don't know what's going on here, but I'm sure you guys did it justice. I would just say this is a really special movie, and I would definitely recommend seeking it out if you ever have the opportunity. And yeah, it's pure vibes. It's pure vibes, baby. It's just a joy to watch. I know some people can't get behind its pacing, but I think those people are insane because there's nothing wrong with this pacing. What struck me about it, as opposed to, is this really the only Yakuza adjacent film we're really watching this week, is that in stark contrast to the outrage stuff, this is such a legible film. Like it is immediately like, it's so easy to read and the characters are well defined and it's not the bizarre morass of like confusion and monotony that comes out of those outrage films. And I know some of that's certainly intent, but boy, this is just so much more wonderful to watch. It's pure poetry.
Yeah, it unfolds kind of the same thing. Like later on, it's revealed that part of the reason they're in this whole situation is because the main Yakuza boss just wanted extra land and extra money, and he just did it. But unlike the outrage movies, they don't really discuss that at all. There's no like, they don't cover all of the betrayals and hijinks and double crosses. It's just them on the beach knowing that if they go anywhere, someone's probably going to kill them.
Yes, and it's much better for that, in my personal opinion.
well, Myros, let me ask you this: if it was 1996, would you rather be a little Yakuza boy or a little boxer boy?
I think I'd probably go boxer. That seems like less dangerous.
Yeah, which is, I mean, that's saying something. But yeah, I think this is one of the rare instances where I would choose getting repeatedly punched in the head and not being allowed to drink or eat snacks. But yeah, Kids Return. Shit. This is a weird one because I'm so used to seeing Kitano being at the center of the Kitano universe. And it's so wild just watching this and not seeing him pop up at some point.
Actually, that's true. This is the first one we've picked that he's not in, isn't it? His second film as director, Boiling Point, he kind of played with this in that he's, if you ever get a copy of Boiling Point, Kitano is always on the front cover, with maybe the exception of the current US Blu-ray from Film Movement, which has some of the worst cover art ever, and I don't know who's on the cover of that movie because no one even looks human. It's like someone who had never seen the film and never drawn anything previously was hired to create cover art. But it's really fun because in Boiling Point, Kitano is in the film, but he just kind of ebbs away. He's not the main character at all. And then after that, he made A Scene at the Sea. He's also not in that film at all. So it's not the first time, but I guess this is the first time we've come across a film where he's just not there. And it is interesting, and it's kind of I suppose to place Kids Return appropriately, it's probably worth discussing that this is the first film Kitano made after a near fatal scooter accident, which he later said in an interview may have been an unconscious suicide attempt, which probably feeds back into how the man made films like Sonatine. But he was very seriously injured in this scooter accident. It paralyzed half his face. He was in hospital for months. It took a long time for him to recover. And there were discussions in Japan about whether or not he would ever work again. You know, he was that seriously injured. And I think Kitano took it upon himself to prove everyone wrong by really jumping right back in. And so an interesting thing about this film is, as I notice it opens with a little painting, a little picture of a little girl opening a box, and there's a little angel ornament in it, which kind of mirrors something, a plot device within the film. I think that's the first instance of a Takeshi Kitano artwork appearing in one of his own films, and this would become a mainstay in his films, and indeed like a core plot element in Hana-bi. But it kind of like immediately marks off. He took up painting while he was recovering from the accident too, so I think that was like a route to recovery. But Kids Return is the film of the man who basically said, "Don't count me out. I'm coming in, but I'm guessing he did not put himself in the film because he was possibly still had his facial injuries and scarring. I mean, he would reappear and he's very clearly like I think right side of his face is paralyzed, which for a man who was already not exactly the most emotive actor, it gives a very strange additional layer of stoicism to his performances. But he maybe wasn't comfortable doing that, so instead he decided to make a kind of semi-autobiographical, although with Kitano it was very hard to work that out, because he also, I think, has claimed that like Achilles and the Tortoise is like a little bit autobiographical, but I don't think it is at all. As we've discussed in that episode, I think that movie is maybe kind of a weird, protracted Shaggy Dog story gag. It's very, very difficult to tell, but Kid's Return is, the story of two high school dropouts who are trying to make it in the world. And weirdly enough, watching it this time, is this more depressing than Sonatine? It's an incredibly depressing movie.
Oh, I think so.
I mean, I guess at the end they're kind of, at least they got your bud.
It's true, yeah. It's kind of like we're doing. It's kind of something I hadn't registered before, but yeah, this is a movie about how everything will just try and beat you down.
Yeah, maybe the most depressive
and
story
eventually
is like the one that's not even the central thing. If you're just following like the third guy in the cafe, where it's just like, oh yeah, he married this woman, but then every job he took fucking ground him to dust until he fucking fell asleep behind the wheel of a cab and died. It's like, oh Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
It's the story of two teenagers who are like they're in high school but not really. And even the teachers are like, the teachers hate them, and the teachers actively tell them just go away, like you're useless, you're an idiot, you can't do any of this, which you wonder if maybe that predated or preceded them not trying very hard at school. But they kind of drop out and they follow two separate paths. One becomes a boxer, the other one becomes a yakuza, and they kind of do pretty well at both until events kind of like conspire against them. And meanwhile, it follows various other boys kind of in their class and around them who also try and kind of join into the world. And it seems, this makes more sense, I guess, coming out of the back of, like, say, the Outrage trilogy, which seems deeply dissatisfied with Japanese culture and kind of like the state of things in modern Japan. I guess that started a lot earlier for Kitano, because this absolutely like is a scathing depiction of a Japan that seems to just grind everyone down to dust and is just incredibly cruel. But at the same time, watching the film, it's not like it's not full of like fatalist imagery in the way that Sonatine is. It's like the slow, everyday, just kind of like grinding of it. It's like you say, I mean, we have the one guy who goes into the corporate world, which is supposed to be like the reliable one, and he maybe fares worse of everyone. So who knows? It's kind of peculiar worldview here. But again, comedians come out maybe on top. Kind of.
The comedians are the only ones who really
if
make
that's
it.
What he's calling like semi-autobiographical, it's like, what is it autobiographical in that you are like the most ancillary characters in this movie? Like the two beats are like kind of there for 5 minutes and just tell jokes every once in a while.
Yeah, well, one you would have to say he doesn't really examine the world of comedy as much as the other ones, which makes their relative success or failure not really resound so much. I think kind of they become more of a chorus to the others rather than anything else. They're just sort of kind of, don't take it too seriously because it's all rigged against you and it'll kill you. Might be, the very fun takeaway of this film. It has, Kid's Return has, I think, again, going back to like A Scene at the Sea, which is about, say a man learned to surf, and it's very much a film about the rhythm of just throwing yourself into doing something. That the way to get good at something is not to have a spark of genius and innate talent. It's just to go out every single day and just do it. And, I think that's one of the strengths of the film, is that it moves away from this all too common thing in a lot of cinema and art form, where like, particularly when it comes to autobiographical elements, where it's like, the reason I'm good at this is because I'm brilliant and I'm touched by God. And there's so many goddamn biographies, like, to the point where honestly the biopic as a film is a joke genre at this point. Like, they can't grapple with the concept that most people who are worth making a biopic about, the reason they were good at it is because they every single day got up and just did it. And that's really boring and tedious and difficult and hard, and no one wants to deal with that. No one wants to watch a movie about it. Kids Return does the same thing. It captures that same idea. I mean, one guy becomes a boxer and he trains and he trains and he trains, and the other guy becomes a yakuza and he takes his licks and he kind of like keeps trying to work his way up and doing, takes a lot of shit. That's how you work as you start as a junior yakuza, and that means everyone gets to tell you you're an idiot for forever while you light their cigarettes. And eventually, like, you become the second junior yakuza, which means there's one guy you can call an idiot, and then everyone else still calls you an idiot. And, bit by bit. And it kind of tracks that, like, movement up for them until both systems, boxing and being a yakuza, eventually just kind of like start hitting on them anyway, because it's not really enough to just want it.
This is it's the anti coming of age movie, essentially, and I like it as an anti biopic too, because it's like no one here is particularly special, and they work really hard. They're pushing the boulder slowly up the hill, if you will. And if this was a traditional coming of age film, or maybe a movie made by almost anyone else, Kids Return, in the end, it's like it'd be like a Rocky finish, or maybe Rocky 2. Or, maybe something bad would happen to his friend because his friend chose crime, and then he's okay because he chose punching people in a boxing way. None of that happens. The end result is the same, whether you choose corporate, whether you choose, an athletic pursuit, or whether you choose a life of crime. Eventually you get close to the top of the mountain, and then instead of getting the boulder over it, it just fucking rolls back down and smashes your face. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's even maybe a little more grim than that, because it's not like they're even getting close to the top of the mountain. It's like they're getting close to the top of a small hill, like, oh, you could be a local amateur boxing champion, or like run this small crew or something, or be an okay salesman. It's like, no, all of these things are unattainable.
Yeah. Like, I want to be a perfectly functional taxi driver. No, fuck you. You're not working hard enough. Like, all right.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, even the taxi driver is like, he gets back from his long, hard day being a taxi driver, and the boss is like, you should make more money. You should work more. And meanwhile, the boxer who's like, the straight and narrow, the discipline, eat right, work hard. And it's just sort of like every single time it's like, no, you got to cut more weight. You got to do this just so you can have a shot at some kind of a local regional title. And of course, within that, eventually he just starts within all his discipline, he starts breaking out. He starts hanging out with another guy who did the exact same thing and didn't make it, and is dejected from it, and starts saying like, no, you can just do, there's pills you can take to lose weight, to lose water weight. You can just throw up your food after you eat it. You taste it, you throw it up, you don't gain weight. All these bad decisions within it, but it's kind of like, what else are you gonna do? Like, there's no satisfaction to be found here.
My recommendation to anyone listening is if someone suggests bulimia as a path to success, I would probably shy away from that.
Yeah, but I mean, it's kind of intriguing in that there's not like a good path and a bad path in that pursuit, even, which seems like, again, in a more like Hollywood storytelling structure, the boxer is going down the more noble path than his friend who's fallen into crime. But from the very start of him training boxing, they're just like teaching him to smash a guy in the face with his elbow. It's just like, you gotta cheat.
Yeah, there's this specific. Yeah, it's this specific thing. It's like, even as hard as you should train to be a boxer and be absolutely the master of your own body and control everything and get up every day at the crack of dawn and just shape and sculpt yourself into being the best boxer, there's someone else doing that too. And so when the referee's not looking, you should try and headbutt him. And like, that's the rules. That's how you win. And this is a film about how winning, not many people get to do it, and when you don't do it, the result is pretty miserable. And that's, for most people, maybe Kitano considers that's kind of like the happiness. I guess fundamentally it's kind of like that the happiness can't come just from the vocation. Everything here is like, choose, none of these people have particularly solid personal lives. We have the one guy with his wife, who's, he meets in the the coffee shop, which is it's not explored particularly, but I guess it's sadder to look at it. All he wants, I think, really is to try and impress her and make her happy, and it doesn't even seem like maybe she's not even being very unreasonable. It's just like to make money as a salaryman, it just takes an awful lot out of you, and you're not hanging out with your wife, which is the reason you're doing it. And what's even the point of that? And meanwhile, the boxer is doing his whole thing to maybe get a hanger-on girlfriend. I mean, he sees other boxers ahead of him who have like a glamorous girlfriend hanging off their arm saying, "You're brilliant," and then they get their ass kicked in the title fight, and then the girlfriend leaves because who wants to hang out with the guy who lost the fight? Like, it's just a whole kind of vision of an entire system set up kind of independent of the things that you probably would make you happy. And I'm wondering, I think Kitano maybe was seriously reevaluating things, because I think Kitano himself had worked insanely hard up until this point. He'd made it as he seems like a guy who didn't know how to relax anyway, but he'd made it as a comedian, but then he managed other people, musicians and comedians, and then obviously he got into filmmaking. He writes, directs, edits everything himself, acts in them. He acts in other people's movies. He goes on TV to talk. He does all this stuff. He's this whirlwind of productivity. And then he makes this movie that's kind of like productivity is a myth. Like, the whole bullshit. The whole thing, the whole grind to become this, it probably won't work, and it probably won't make you feel happy. And you wonder if part of this was Kitano sitting in a hospital bed or at a physiotherapy session or something, just going like, shit, I fucked up. Like none of this has been working, and now I'm almost dead. I think that there's a certain weight behind this film within that kind of context in his career. This feels like a very unhappy film.
Well, Jack, let me tell you something. Let's go from we went from one kind of downer of a movie to another.
I think
downer
you guys are too down on these downers. I don't think Sonatine's like a downer, really. I mean, it's about a character who is suicidal, but the movie itself is.
I mean, the final shot of the movie is him blowing his fucking
but it's also
out.
still, again, quite ethereal and ambiguous, and it's also it's just so much of the movie is them like really just kind of enjoying getting away from all of this shit, and there's such a playfulness to it that I don't consider it a particularly depressing movie. This one is for a great deal of it, but even still, he's ending it on a note of extreme optimism and this sort of stick-to-itiveness of like, we're still young, we still have much to do in this world, and we've taken punches, but it's
Well, let's switch gears there. Let's go to something that's uplifting. What would happen if, like, your friends got shot and one of them was paralyzed and you kind of blame yourself for it, and your wife has
this
leukemia.
One's probably a little more of a downer.
We're of course talking about 1997's Hana-bi or Hana-bi. I don't know how to say it. It's fireworks. It's another fucking Stone Cold Kitano classic, but another one where you're like, Jesus Christ. It's like a fucking just an obstacle course of depression punches in the fucking face.
It certainly it's great. And I agree with Adam. Because I think the art of these films is beautiful, and the kind of like to sit in their presence is energizing. Certainly, to see Kitano, and I think really Hana-bi perhaps more than all of them for me, I think this is Kitano at the absolute height of his power. This is, I think, his masterpiece above all his other several masterpieces. This is the film, and maybe part of that is this is a film I found pretty early on when I was starting to explore cinema, and this movie just like basically blew the doors open on what I realized movies could do. It's like, oh shit, they could do anything. They don't, you can go anywhere. You can show anything. You don't have to be stuck to a story. You don't have to care about audience expectations or anything. Like, you can just kind of wander around and be in your own vibe. You can just show off your own paintings. You can kind of be sad and mournful, but like not really explain it or talk about it too much. You can just kind of like let the music do the talking, or let, an image here or there do it. It was this incredibly enervating experience. Like I say, really pointed me all the way to like Japanese cinema, particularly in classical Japanese cinema, because then you check the reviews and it's like, oh, it's like Ozu and this and that, and then you go down there and holy crap, it's amazing, it's everything. But yeah, I think there's a beautiful tone to all of these films as he negotiates the weight of existence, and I think that's really what these films are. Is it's kind of like a negotiation with I think Sonatine is the film of a deeply depressed man, and then Hana-bi is interesting because I think it's the film of a man who nearly died and didn't, and he's just kind of like looking around going like, okay, something's gotta be next, like I can't just kill myself again, like I gotta do something else. And that's kind of the film. It's it's just sublimating into other art, and he has various kind of like avatars within this. There's the character Kitano was playing himself, Nishi, the kind of ex-cop taking his sick wife on one last road trip around Japan, and then Horeba, the other detective played by Renasugi again, who's takes up art. He's paralyzed in a shooting, and he just takes up art, and he starts, because his family leave. It's just like he got shot and he's paralyzed, his family just left, which is like this incredibly abrupt, cruel thing, but also, Frank, probably not that unrealistic. Probably something that happens more often than you'd like to imagine. That it's hard living with someone who suddenly needs a lot more stuff. Well, yeah, and there's it disrupts
such a
any
strange
household.
Complexity layered in there too, where he's introduced as this guy who's like, I spoil my daughter, I'm gonna work all day and take her to the amusement park, and then he just doesn't. He calls her, it's like, no, we're not going to the amusement park. So it's like, you get a sense that there's a lot more to their relationship. It's a lot more complicated than he's letting on to his friends to begin with, even before his accident. So it's kind of
Yep. Yeah, no, it's that was interesting actually looking at it this time, because you're right. It's kind of like he dotes on his daughter, he loves her so much, and then he's just on a stakeout all day, and he's like constantly working. And then later on, Suzuma Terujima's character, who again plays a junior cop in this movie, is like talking about how he kind of mentions how they were a real close knit family, and it's kind of like, do these police officers have any clue what's going on? Because Terujima's character, of course, is also met a girl because he got shot in the same fracas that injured his colleague, and the girl he was dating, who we don't see in the film, but she, he decides he's going to propose to her because she showed up to the hospital every day, even though he didn't really like her. He says, like, I didn't really like her, but then she showed up to the hospital every single day, and that really touched me. And there is some kind of a sentiment in that like he really, he actually had like this look beyond, and he realized, that marriage or a long-term relationship, there's something more to it than just, your immediate superficial impressions of this and that. But then in his description of Horibe's family, it's kind of like, do these guys know what's going on at all? Hard to, very unreliable narrators.
It's not hard to like imagine that they do not, considering, one of the principals is Kitano at his perhaps most like removed. He's so silent. He says about 5 things in this fucking movie, it seems like.
Oh my god, yeah, it's like Weekend at Bernie's level of like, he's literally just got like little sunglasses on, and he just kind of sits there, and occasionally people talk at him. It's fucking awesome.
It's like, yeah, he's supposed to be best friends with this other detective that gets paralyzed. He's known him for decades. It's like they fucking exchanged 3 words basically.
Yeah,
it's honestly early in the movie. It's strange because I swear Kitano smiles more in the early parts of this movie than he ever has anywhere else in his career, and I swear it's just unsettling. And it's just kind of like, because he doesn't say anything, people just talk to him, and it's like, and he just kind of smiles and chuckles, and then he still does cruel jokes. Like there's one scene where a guy throws a baseball too far, and it rolls to Kitano's feet. Kitano pretends he's about to throw the baseball back, and then he just throws it somewhere else, just being just an absolute shithead. But then he goes home to his wife, who he apparently maybe really loves. It's like, they're very unclear relationships, but it's also, I think it's important when you look at something like Hana-bi, that it's like a realization that probably it's really just a film about Kitano. It's a film about the men, particularly. The women are very peripheral in these films, and really in I think all of Kitano's films. I don't think he's ever written a particularly nuanced female character. The one exception might be, again, I keep going back to A Scene at the Sea, which is this interesting reconfiguration of the lead female character towards the end of the film. But like most of his films really are kind of they're about men being men, and having their man thoughts and their man problems, and the women are peripheral to that, and the women can't really help them, and they can't really bring them out of it. There's this limitation to it, which makes it unclear. I mean, his trip for his wife is very generous in one sense, and it's good, but we don't really understand their relationship entirely because they never talk to each other. They just kind of hang out near each other, and maybe it's a strong enough relationship they don't have to talk to each other. But it's also difficult to know, considering that Nishi, we know, is capable of insane levels of violence. So it's kind of weird, how these things balance, and it's not.
No, that's like his number one mode of expression. That's the only time you get any emotion out of him is when he can, stab someone's eye out or shoot them in the head.
It's just strange.
And it's like he's going home to his wife.
The
after
violence
this.
in these movies, this one especially, is so bizarre because it's such a still movie, and then he'll punch someone and blood will just fucking explode everywhere like you're playing Mortal Kombat or something. Like it's goddamn nuts.
Well, and the ways that he kills people. I mean, not only is it extremely fucking like violent and gory, but it's almost like he's like a cat playing with a mouse. There's the one scene where there's a couple of punks that are gonna rough him up or something, and he punches the one guy in the face and breaks his nose, and then the other guy tries to get him with a knife, stabs him, and he doesn't really react. He just throws the guy on the ground and then stands over him, dangling the knife before he drops it. Which is just like, Jesus Christ,
it's like blood on the canvas.
It's little
that
touches.
Blood is paint on the canvas in this movie for sure. Like it's just such a crazy thing. Like it's I've never seen it quite used like this in any other film, really. It's just because it's such a strange juxtaposition. Because the majority of this is not even a little bit of an action movie. I would say the bank robbery that it's building toward for the first half of the film is just him via security camera footage walking up to a bank teller and saying nothing at all, and then walking away with a bag full of money.
Yeah. It's not like we're watching Michael Mann here.
He just drives away at the speed limit.
It's great. It's fucking great. And especially because there's this big buildup where, he goes to this junkyard and he tries to get like a police siren and a light. And then he gets a car and he has to paint it so it looks like a cop car. It's this whole thing. And then, he just walks up and he's like, out of security camera, drives away 20 miles per hour. It's awesome.
It's kind of procedural element to it, I mean, because what else is a bank robbery? He brought a gun. It's not even a real gun, ironically. It's worth noting within this film, as in case not clear, this is Kitano's vision of police. He's not a gangster in this movie. He is a cop for part of the film, and then he is a retired cop, which I guess spins back to, I mean, his first film, Violent Cop, was also a pretty scathing vision of law enforcement in Japan. It's one thing I is funny watching these movies, because, like, Kitano's movies are full of just casual, brutal violence and murder, and then, you look over to Japan, and it's like, a man was shot in Japan. It's like, it's the first person murdered there this year. And I'm like, how do they counterpoint these things? Like, God, outrage is like, I swear every outrage movie is like 100 people plus are murdered in them. It's very, I don't think the gun violence can register there, because a guy had to build a gun just to murder the ex-prime minister.
Whereas we've had like 1,300 mass shootings this year or something.
I know. Like, we have more violence in a day than Japan will have in a decade, basically.
I know, but there's still people online who are like, see, gun control doesn't work. And it's like, because one dude had to build one to kill a guy.
Yeah. Which, I mean, if you're going full steampunk to, like, fucking kill a politician, I guess you earned it at that point.
How many dumbass teenagers who have committed mass murder wouldn't have if they had to build the gun? That's all I'm saying. I don't think a lot of them, a lot of them would have copped out. They've been like, fuck, I'll play video games or whatever. Like, it would have been...
It seems like a real pain in the ass. I mean, I saw How to Blow Up a Pipeline, and that whole movie is just about, like, bumbling doofus early 20s people trying to do the right thing and commit eco-terrorism, but also like blowing themselves up in the process and really harming themselves. Whereas like now it's like in America, I could go on fucking Craigslist and buy a machine gun from a Walmart parking lot from some random stranger like in an hour if I needed to. There's no effort. Come on.
Yeah, it really cheapens the whole thing. But you
really
know,
does,
yeah,
really does.
yeah. Going back to the movie, which doesn't dwell too much on all of that.
No, but it ties in because the violence it's so quick and brutal and sudden. It really does kind of just underscore everything else the movie's doing. The rest of the movie, Myros, to your point, is it's such a still and methodical film. And I think if this was in the hands of anyone else, like every time I watch a Kitano film, I'm just like, Jesus fucking Christ! If this was some American Hollywood film, it would be a disaster. It's like, oh no, the cancer wife and the ex-cop going on one last trip. That sounds horrible.
I mean,
but the place where this really shines is it's just like the artwork that Kitano's ex-partner is doing, where he's kind of doing this like I'm sure there's an actual art word for it, but essentially he's just using markers to create little dots. But
I have pointillism.
You know,
pointillism.
Dots help. Yeah, there you go. The little dots, they give color and they give character to what he's doing, but really the thing that makes it so striking is all the stuff in between, that negative space, and that's what's great about Hana-bi is it's all this stillness, and then when you get to the point where Takeshi Kitano is ripping someone's eyeball out, it makes it hit that much harder. So
I think this is him at his full, like what we discussed earlier, like Sonatine has, I think, he was really starting to develop that visual grammar that's really quintessential. Like Kitano movies move like no one else's movies, and this is something I felt was, and I feel more justified in having, you know, gone back and rewatched these, that I feel like his later films do lack a little bit. They don't have that same clean smoothness to them. Like the Outrage films, they're kind, like they're still recognizably Kitano, but they're not as like just pure as these. You know, like one of the things that's interesting watching in later movies, he has like fade to blacks. There's not a single fade to black in any of these movies. It's these straight cuts, and he is able to maintain tempo so perfectly with them and kind of create easy to follow movement. You know, like all of his scenes, like it's very artistically done, but it's not like quote unquote art cinema and being difficult. Like his movies are very smooth and easy to follow. The violence is largely implied or heavy. You know, the key parts, like the parts of the violence that would be hard to do for special effects, are completely elided over. They're completely suggested, but you never have that issue because his editing and construction of them is absolutely seamless. And this is something I think he pretty much just taught himself. Like he developed himself. And then on top of that, he still has room for, you know, his kind of interesting little breathing shots in between that kind of like reframe maybe part of a scene that we've seen, you know, kind of like not, you know, it's not exactly what we just saw, but it's kind of like a key image from it or something. Maybe he plays out the scene and it kind of like it's messing with the chronology of it a little bit, but it just makes sense to have it in there. And in Hana-bi as well, he also has his paintings, which are all real Takeshi Kitano paintings. I assume he made most of them for the movie. Or, you know, I don't know. I think he has 2 daughters, so unless he really, really hates one of his daughters, it would be really weird if he made that many paintings of a family with one daughter, which mirrors the cop in the movie. So I'm guessing he made them for the film. But I do really like his painting style because again, it's very it's very kind of like polished and distinct, but also has this kind of rough amateurish element to it. Like it doesn't look like the clean lines of a keen professional artist. It's like they almost have like this childlike kind of quality to them, but then in the shading and the coloring and the details and the ideas behind them, they're much more kind of like interesting works of art. And I think it really comes to the forefront here in this film that he intersperses them as like the things that helped him to recover from his near-death experience, and it has a character in here using them for that element too, trying to find meaning and struggling to find meaning, and it all meshes together in this film in a really, I think, a really beautiful way. Like, I mean, it's hard for me, as I say, this film is very special to me. This is just one of those movies that just absolutely just took over my mind when I first saw it, and it's never really left it. It's like every other movie is kind of like, how does it stack up to this one? So, but yeah, I mean, watching it again, it's not dulled
No.
at all for me. In it's just a tremendous film.
I don't think that's an unfair assessment, frankly. I think really, as much as I've been a bit of a grumpy Gus about particularly the outrage stuff, I think we watched easily two of the better films of the 1990s this week. So I think there's Hana-bi is fucking incredible. Like, it's just such a beautiful film. Like, it's just staggering. Like, I don't, when it finds its cadence, and what separates for me this from the later work, and I think the only one of the previous films that we have covered that really kind of halfway gets there is Takeshi's, which has kind of a strange lyricism to it, especially in the third act. But this is just such a piece of poetry to me. Like, it's just, I don't know. There's something very distinct in his editing from this period where it's, if you say self-taught, that's not surprising at all, because it doesn't follow traditional rules. There's so much disjointed stuff in this editing, and it lends it such a unique quality, even compared to something like Ozu, which Lord knows he didn't follow traditional like Western formalism at all, but it's just a lot more formalist work than what Kitano's doing. He's just doing something that at the time was very new. And if you've seen a lot of this sort of broken editing now, it's a lot of it's informed by these films. Like, these were very influential films.
And he's doing like really, he got like near the very opening of this film, there's this really great scene. Steve mentioned it, where basically like two punks are like hanging out in his car. And so he confronts them, and having known anything about Kitano films, you're like, oh, he's gonna beat these guys up. And then we hear this thudding noise over a black screen, and we're like, oh, he just punched someone. But no, then the scene starts, and it's the sound of a sponge hitting the windshield as he makes one of the punks clean his car, having dirtied it by having their lunch on the hood. And it's like this very funny kind of like joke of like, oh, we thought that was him hitting him, but actually it was just he made him wash it. And then later on they cut back to the scene, because this scene actually, it actually occurs later into the film. It's like presaging it, and then we find out no, he did actually
he did.
also beat them up in the middle. So it's like this is kind of like joke again, like an incredibly Kitano-esque joke, but again also a completely cinematic joke, a joke comprised entirely out of understanding the fundamentals of making a film. That's really, really funny. Honestly, it's a little misdirected. Almost reminds me of like the opening of like Tati's Jour de Fée with like the horses neighing, and it's like a guy dragging a trailer, and it's like merry-go-round horses, and there's the sound of horses neighing, and you're like, okay, I mean that's wistful and fun, and then the car pulls on, and then you see there's actually horses over the field behind it that were previously not visible, and you're like, oh no, there actually are horses in the scene. He's not, it's like, I'm breaking the rules, but I'm not actually breaking the rules, but I made you think about the rules. And that's Kitano does that a lot.
Maybe I'm a little hyper fixated on editing because I was just studying it, but it's just, to me, this is one of the most beautifully edited films I've ever seen. Frankly, I think it's just such a remarkably put together piece of work.
It is, and it's remarkable. Yeah, as I say, like, I think Kitano he seems to know just how to put it together. Like, he shoots his scenes to like assemble them in this way. I'm just kind of in awe of the way he puts it together, because his film, I am really struck with the way that it's like, it's not like an abstract methodology. Like, the scenes flow very naturally and seamlessly, but he just has these inserts and these kind of like ways that he weighs certain images and counterpunches certain images with one another and stuff, that it's like, it's just absolutely like, you would show this in an editing class as like, the editing isn't just joining bits together. Editing creates meaning. That's what Kitano is doing throughout all of these films. He is creating meaning in the way that he counterpoints images and moves through them. That is more than just man walks into building, cut to man in building. He is at the top of his form here, and it really is something to behold.
Absolutely. Well, we got to wrap this one up because we're getting a little long on time. So, Adam Myros, what are you putting over this week?
As per always, I didn't watch jack shit, so I'm going to spend my time saying we're going to put over ourselves here, a little self-promotion. What I did do is I took some time and I compiled all of Editor Colin's fun promo videos that you may have never seen if you're not a Twitter user like any sane, rational adult. You avoid that shit. You could search Optimism Vaccine on YouTube. We've got all that stuff compiled, and we're going to be publishing full episodes there as well. If you think there's going to be any like visual component, you're going to get to stare at Steve's face. Well, think again. We're not doing that, but it's just another place to find the content. So yeah, go ahead and check that out if you're so inclined. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Jack, what are you putting over this week?
I am so full of hope that I have just started, as of yesterday, started the new video game Final Fantasy 16, and it's really impressive so far. I'm really enjoying it, and I say this, I've played all the mainline Final Fantasy games, and I really do love the franchise as much for my memories attached to having always played it as much as any of the individual games actually being really good. Some of them I think certainly are. Some of them aren't so good. This one is it's really good so far. It really feels like they've kind of maybe finally made a coherent battle system in one of the games where they talk, which I don't think they've ever managed to do previously, except for 10. I guess that one had a pretty good battle system, but they talked really slow and it was annoying. The cinematics in this are actually really great. The voice acting, it's honestly, it's really impressive. So it could get back to me in an episode or two when I'm still putting things over and see if I still put over that game or if I'm like, it fucking sucks now. So, but I'm hopeful.
Would you like to weigh in on the Irish accents that are prevalent?
I'm not sure which one. There's a few bit characters. There was one person who I thought was Irish, but no, it turned out, well, I didn't think. I was like, her accent was really weird, and at times it sounded like maybe an Irish person hiding their accent, but it turns out the voice actress for that is actually Norwegian, so she just had a weird accent to begin with. But yeah, no, it's really good, and they got Ralph Ineson, who has just one of the best voices ever, and he's talking away, and it's very good. I kind of hope it keeps working. If it does, I think I'm gonna have a really great week or two ahead of me.
Oh my god, this is gonna be probably the first Final Fantasy game that I buy since 9. So
yeah, and honestly, I recommend it. So far, I think you should. I haven't found a good, like Final Fantasy 15. Don't bother. Just.
Mm-hmm.
But this even one, I am vaguely curious, and I have no experience with Final Fantasy, but I think this one looks a little bit more up my alley than most.
Mm-hmm. I believe in a past life, Myros, you would have called this a gnome.
It looks
game.
a little less gnome. We got enough. We got enough like high def monstrosities. Then I can deal with that. It's just when you get more on that fable end of things, I don't want to see any elves. No elves, but
yeah,
dragons.
No
yes,
no
elves.
Strong no elf policy.
Strong no elf policy. Yeah. Well, this week I'm going to put over something I probably should have put over last week, but I didn't. I went and I saw Southland Tales in an actual movie theater, and Richard Kelly was there, and it was the can cut, and it was fucking good, and I hadn't watched it in a very, very, very long time, and I didn't like it when I first saw it, and I'm glad that I had the opportunity to kind of, reassess this one because I think it's fucking fantastic. And Richard Kelly seems like a really nice dude, very normal and just seems like a nice guy. Also, shout out to the Oriental Theater in Milwaukee because they did a moderated discussion as opposed to audience Q&A, and that is always the preferred route. I could really live happily the rest of my life never having to experience the secondhand embarrassment of an audience Q&A ever again. So the moment a guy's like, more of a comment than a question. Jesus fucking Christ, put a gun in my mouth. Give me the Kitano on the beach.
Cuff, were you not on our Richard Kelly episode?
No, I wasn't. I wasn't on the Richard Kelly episode.
Long ago when we watched
No, it's like a couple of years ago. But yeah, so anyways, hey, if you like the podcast, do us a big favor. There's a link in the description, and that link will take you to our Patreon page. And why would you want to be a patron? Well, first of all, you get to give us money, and there's so much joy in giving. Is there not joy in giving, gentlemen?
Well, when you have things to give, yes. When I pull a katana and rob that bank, I will be the most generous man on earth. But as of now, just got to pay the rent.
I know, yeah, that's true. But hey, how do we pay for things? Podcasting is expensive. We got to pay for hosting. What if a microphone breaks? Jesus, Myros' computer just took a shit. That could be a serious issue. How do we pay for things? And the answer is through your love and support, dear patrons. But you give us money, it's not like you don't get jack shit. You get a lot of shit, actually. If you donate at any level whatsoever, I will send you a movie from my personal collection, assuming you live in the continental United States. I'm going to send it to your motherfucking doorstep. You're going to get a movie from me. Will it be good? Maybe. Will it be a Blu-ray? Maybe. Will it be a VHS tape? Entirely possible. I've got a VHS copy of Leprechaun in the Hood just staring at me over here. Maybe that will end up in your mailbox. Who's to say? Now, you also get access to the Optimism Vaccine Patreon feed, and this gives you just tons of backlog stuff that is only available to patrons. That's, exclusive podcast episodes. That's written stuff that we did in the past. All kinds of goodies. You get the goodies. Now, if you donate at a higher level, let's say $5, you get to vote on episodes. We'll put up a poll every once in a while. You get to fucking vote. You get a vote. And on top of that, you get your name read out in the air. So, Myros, who are our 5 and above?
We have CWW, Evan, Ryan, Dustin, and Paula.
God bless every single one of them. Now, if you want to, you can be a real all-star, and you can donate at the $25 level. And whether that's a one-time thing, you want to bump it back down after that, or you want to keep it going because you love us and you support us and you're just a good person, that's cool too. But at that $25 level, you actually get to pick an episode. You dictate it. And that's how we got Hell's a Poppin'.
And we got another one coming too.
Not how we got another one coming too. Yeah, we got another one coming. It's in the pipeline. It'll be coming shortly. So yeah, wonderful opportunity. You get to tell us what to watch. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. Our patrons are wonderful people. They have us watch.
Yeah. We also did finally get around to posting that bonus episode. We have a newly posted Patreon bonus.
The one I thought was already posted.
The Jalal Merhai Billy Blanks spectacular. Expect No Mercy.
Yeah. All my Merhai mamas and my blank boys out there, we got something special for you on the Patreon. So make sure you throw down a couple bucks so you can get access to that. Jack, you know any Merhai mamas?
No.
I don't think Jalal Merhai knows any Merhai mamas, if we're being honest with herself.
Hey, that's right. His wife was in that one movie. Well, Expect No Mercy. She had her car stolen. That's love is putting your wife in your movie. That's important.
That's true. That's true. It is. That's what it's all about, folks. But yeah, if you have any questions, comments, death threats, marriage proposals, optimismvaccine@gmail.com. Adam Myros standing by, as always, smashing that refresh button, looking at everything you have to say, or just interrogating me on my PayPal purchases, because my PayPal account is linked to the podcast account. Don't ask.
Don't tell our patrons that. It sounds suspicious to me. Yeah, much less probably to them as well.
It sounds suspicious. No, it's because I got my actual email address PayPal thing account was hacked at some point, so then I just attached it to the Optimism Vaccine one. I pay for fucking parking. That's all I do. It has nothing to do with the podcast. It's just
I heard you've been buying some influencers' books or some shit.
Listen, this is a pro Carolyn Calloway podcast. I want you to know that, Myros. We love her and all of her scams. Anyways, you could also tweet at us at Optimism Vaccine on Twitter. We'd love to hear from you. And I think that about wraps it up. More Kitano coming your way soon. No Steve for 2 weeks, so feel free to celebrate if you want to shoot off some fireworks on the beach like Takeshi Kitano and his friends. Feel free to do that. It's something worth celebrating. So we'll be back next week. It sounds like I have something to say, but I don't.